On the buy side, you have a variety of different risks. On the front end of this, you have the risk that you didn't tie the acquisition to identifiable strategy, right? So you can't in one sentence say why this acquisition should be done. So the risk of you not doing this on the front end is actually great. So you need to spend a lot of time saying to yourself, how does this acquisition or how does an acquisition serve my strategic purpose? We're growing at such and such a rate internally. Here's our opportunities without doing an acquisition. Why do we need to do a deal to help us get from point A to point B? And you have to put a lot of thought into that. The second risk you face is you weren't proactive enough. You didn't give yourself enough optionality on the front end. You didn't build a wide enough pipeline to be able to assess acquisition opportunities, right? So almost by definition, there's opportunity cost to this. Like if you do one deal, you're not going to do the other one. So you need to make sure that you've casted a wide enough net, that you were a hunter, that you went out, you weren't reactionary, you didn't fish, you didn't put your name out there as a buyer and sit back and relax. You went out as a hunter and found the various different targets that may serve this corporate purpose that you've spent a lot of time thinking about. You've done that now, you've got optionality. So you've got a variety of different targets. There's a risk in you not doing that homework up front, and that's what you need to do. The third risk you face is that you didn't do your homework in terms of synergy. You know, when you think about an acquisition, you start to think about the variety of different purposes it will serve, and a lot of folks will get excited. Hey, I can cut this cost and I'll get some revenue enhancement here, and the combined entity will really create value for me. And sometimes, when this happens all the way at the big corporate level, sometimes we get a little over enthusiastic about what the acquisition will ultimately do, and we come to realize that we won't realize all those synergies, right? So that's the third risk. The fourth risk, and we're going to talk about this heavily when we get into valuation negotiation, is that you're actually paying the buyer from a pricing perspective for the value that you, the acquirer, will create, right? So if a fair market value of a business or what it's worth to the actual seller is $10 million, but when you acquire that business, you'll get revenue enhancements and cost savings and so on and so forth. So the value of the business would be $15 million. There's a danger you write a check for $15 million. You might as well not have done that transaction, right? Because you've literally just paid the seller for the value creation. So that's a risk. The fifth risk is execution and diligence risk, that you didn't do your homework in DD. You didn't ask the right questions. You didn't have the right advisors. You didn't do the right finance and accounting DD. You have to do due diligence. You have to make sure that the check that you're writing, you're actually getting what you're paying for. And so there's a lot of snafus there in the diligence process. The sixth risk, on broad terms, is the purchase agreement and final execution. Right? You didn't protect yourself appropriately in the final definitive documents. And then, of course, the final risk is integration risk. This is where you should have been planning integration almost from your first conversation with the seller through the consummation of the transaction. And by the time the deal gets done, you actually have an integration plan and team ready on paper to execute on that. So that's the final one. And every one of these risk buckets, from the first one to the last one, is a massive threat to you, and it'll destroy the reason for having done the deal in the first place. Again, as you know, Potomac's not a buy-side shop. We're exclusively a sell-side M&A advisor, but we actually do more buy-side transactions than we do sell-side transactions, which I know is a very bizarre concept. But whenever we have a client signs up with us, and our goal is to help them build value in their business before they exit. And I feel like the extreme majority of our clients love to do acquisitions, for better or for worse. So while we don't charge our clients for this service, we've got a massive team of analysts and transaction advisory folks. So the same sort of people that do due diligence, so financial and accounting due diligence at some of the large firms like Deloitte & Touche, Ernst & Young, so on and so forth, they are part of Potomac and they work on our team. And so what is very typical is we'll have a client who says, hey, I'm interested in acquiring company XYZ. I've never done a deal before. How do I get started? Well, we'll help them craft an NDA for the seller. We'll put together a financial model for them. So they'll request materials and information. Our analyst team will put together a financial model, give them a valuation. They might say, hey, how can I craft an LOI? Well, they've got their legal counsel, but from a business perspective, we can put together an offer for them. How do we do due diligence? Well, we're not going to actually do the due diligence per se, but we have a transaction advisory team that can look at the numbers and point out red flags for the client. And the client will, of course, have a variety of other advisors involved. But we do this probably 70 or 80 times a year for a variety of clients. I mean, I can think of one client where we've done probably 16 or 17 transactions for. I can think of another client who's very interesting, and this might be interesting for you to know. He said, I look at 20 good deals for every one great deal I do. Again, he looks at 20 good deals for every one great deal he does. And that doesn't count all the trash that he probably has to wade through to see the 20 good deals. So I'm doing this because this is a core part of our business. Although we don't charge for it, our clients benefit from our buy-side expertise, and I hope you will as well. Now, this is the first installment of a multi-part series I'll be doing on buy-side M&A. Today, we talked about some basics. How do you know if doing a deal is right for you? What are some things to avoid? How do you think about proprietary deal flow? In the next installment, we're going to talk about valuation and structuring an offer. So how do you think about valuing the target? How do you structure that offer? How do you draft an LOI? And we're going to kind of compare and contrast what I would do on the buy side with the LOI versus what I want to see on the sell side from an LOI. So as a quick example, on the sell side, you want a very extensive letter of intent. The letter of intent is the roadmap to the purchase agreement. In any M&A transaction, one massive key point of leverage for the seller is the signing of the LOI. At the signing of the LOI, leverage tends to shift from seller to buyer. And that usually happens because the seller is going from non-exclusive to exclusive, meaning all the other buyers then disappear at that point in time in the process, and the seller is dealing with one buyer. So from a leverage perspective, you want to get everything you possibly can negotiated and put into that LOI prior to commencing diligence. Now, if you're buying a business, though, and you're not up against somebody like me, I would say take the exact opposite approach to that. You want to hand over a one-page LOI. You don't want to say much. I want to buy your business. Here's what I think I'll pay for it. And I want to be exclusive for a long period of time. And that's about it. Here's the confidentiality clause. And we'll talk about this in more detail when we get into the segment. But those are two very different perspectives. And I think you need to lean in on this side as a buyer. In the next installment, we're going to talk about my favorite topic, which is the psychology and the negotiation of a transaction. And our focus this time will be the buy side. Well, I spend the majority of my time on the sell side, but the buy side's fun as well. And it's very different from the sell side. In the beginning of this sell side masterclass, I talked about books like Never Split the Difference, for example, and Getting to Yes being not particularly helpful to sell side M&A. And I believe that, and I live that every single day. But that sort of stuff is far more pertinent when you're on the buy side, because on the buy side, you're building a relationship with the seller. If you're avoiding formal processes, you're building a relationship with the seller to keep his blinders on. You don't want him to introduce competition. You want him to only have eyes for you. And how you do that is build a relationship. You validate his feelings. You listen to him. So you're taking a very different approach than the Wild West cowboy of sell-side M&A. Now, here you're validating emotions and building relationships, and we'll talk a lot about that in the installment on buy-side negotiation. Once we've negotiated, we've drafted the LOI, we've negotiated the transaction, we've signed the LOI, and now we get into exclusivity. That's the due diligence period. So the next installment of this series will be focused on due diligence. And it can't be all-encompassing and comprehensive. What I hope to do is point out some things to you that you might not be thinking about. What does your diligence roadmap look like? What are the key things that you really need to focus on so you don't end up falling on your own sword? What is financial diligence? What is accounting diligence? What is legal diligence? What is operational diligence? How do you have to think about all those things and how do you manage those? That's what we'll talk about in the due diligence segment. And the final installment will be the closing and the drafting and execution of the definitive deal docs, either the stock purchase agreement or the asset purchase agreement. And these are important because you and the seller will be effectively drafting a private body of law that will govern the relationship going forward. When you buy a business, the relationship doesn't end at the closing statement. The seller has represented to you that he or she is selling you certain things. That, number one, they have title to the assets, that there's no fraud, that they paid their taxes. There's a variety of different things that goes into this. After the deal is consummated, you might find out you just bought a fleet of vehicles that actually weren't owned by the seller. What sort of recourse will you have? Is there a holdback in there? Is there an indemnity escrow? How will your life be impacted post-closing if, in fact, you wrote a check but didn't get exactly what you thought you were buying? All that's covered in the purchase agreement. And we'll talk about that in the final segment of this series. We'll be filming the remainder of the Buy-Side Masterclass series in the coming weeks. So if you have any requests or questions, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. And finally, as we get into the more technical aspects of buy-side M&A, I'll be able to provide you with a variety of different items, such as a template LOI, a buy-side due diligence checklist that I think will come in handy as you go out and attempt to make acquisitions on your own. I put a link in the description section below. You can click on that so you can be notified as soon as those are ready to go out. Here at Potomac, we love to kill it for our clients. And I think that education is the cornerstone which allows our clients to make the best decisions for themselves. The more you can understand about the nuances of how strategic acquirers work, how the operations of private equity firms work, and the psychology and the tactics of an M&A transaction, the better you're going to be when it comes time to pull the trigger. If you own a business and you're being contacted by strategic acquirers, search funds, private equity firms, and you're trying to size up what you might do, take a step back and give us a call. We'll help you forge a plan, whether that exit is a year from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. We'll help you think through a plan that is specifically tailored to your financial goals and objectives. So please contact us directly. I've put a link to the contact form in the description of this video, and you can also contact me directly on LinkedIn. And feel free to share this masterclass series with somebody who you think might benefit from it. Again, I'm Giannamore. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next one.